You walk into a crowded room. Every face is different. Every voice sounds a little different, but every single one of them is the same species as you. That has not always been true. For most of the story of this planet, there was never just one kind of human. There were several, walking the same rivers, hunting the same herds, looking up at the same moon. And then, in a span of time that is almost nothing on a geological clock, all of them vanished. Except you. Why? Around 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged in Africa. But you were not alone. Neanderthals were already thriving across Europe and Asia, thick-boned and cold-adapted, with brains as large as yours, sometimes larger. Homo erectus was still walking parts of Asia, a species that had already survived for over 1 million years. Denisovans were spread through Siberia and beyond, known today almost entirely through fragments of bone and strands of ancient DNA. Homo floresiensis, barely a meter tall, lived on a remote Indonesian island, nicknamed the Hobbit by the researchers who found it. At least 6 human species shared the Earth at once. 6. Picture that. Not one dominant humanity looking out at a world of animals. Multiple kinds of people, aware of each other, sometimes meeting each other, sometimes competing for the same cave, the same coastline, the same game trail. And then one by one, they disappeared. Homo floresiensis vanished around 50,000 years ago. Denisovans faded from the genetic record not long after. Neanderthals, the last real rivals, held on in pockets of Iberia until roughly 40,000 years ago and then went silent. Homo sapiens kept going. Alone. This is not ancient trivia. This is the reason you exist the way you do, as the only human species on the planet, something that has never been true before in the entire history of your genus. So what actually happened? For decades, the easy story was that your ancestors were simply better, smarter, more violent, more capable. Humans in, Neanderthals out, end of story. But the real answer is far stranger and far more revealing about what kind of creature you actually are. Start with the brain. Neanderthal brains were not smaller than yours. In many specimens, they were larger. They made tools. They controlled fire. They buried their dead, sometimes with flowers and ochre, gestures that look uncomfortably close to grief. A 2018 study led by paleoanthropologist Dirk Hoffman published in Science dated cave paintings in Spain to at least 64,000 years old, tens of thousands of years before Homo sapiens ever reached that part of Europe. The only artists who could have made them were Neanderthals. So it was not raw intelligence that separated you from them. Something else did. Researcher Kim Sterelny, along with anthropologists studying group behavior across ancient hominins, has argued that the real advantage was not individual brain power. It was network size. Homo sapiens groups appear to have maintained wider, looser social webs, connecting bands that were not directly related to each other. Neanderthal groups, by contrast, look tighter and more isolated, often showing genetic signs of inbreeding within small, closed populations. Here is why that matters. A tight group can survive a good year. A wide network can survive a bad century. When a Homo sapiens band faced a drought, a collapsed herd migration, a harsh decade of cold, they could travel to a neighboring group they had never even met and be recognized. Shared symbols, shared rituals, shared trade goods passed from hand to hand across hundreds of kilometers. A stranger from 3 valleys away was not necessarily a threat. Sometimes he was a resource. A Neanderthal band facing the same crisis had a much smaller circle to fall back on. When local conditions turned, there was often nowhere else to go. This is the part that should feel strange to hear. Your ancestors likely did not outfight the competition. They outconnected them. There is also the matter of numbers. Genetic research led by population geneticists studying ancient DNA, including work associated with paleogeneticist Svante Pääbo, whose lab sequenced the first full Neanderthal genome, suggests Neanderthal populations across their entire range may have totaled only in the tens of thousands at any given time. Homo sapiens populations, expanding out of Africa in overlapping waves, appear to have grown faster and spread wider. A species with more bodies, more births, more attempts at survival simply has more chances to weather a catastrophe. It is not glamorous. It is closer to statistics than to heroism. But statistics win, eventually, given enough time. And climate did not make it easy for anyone. Around 40,000 years ago, Europe swung through a series of brutal cold snaps, some lasting centuries, layered on top of a massive volcanic eruption near modern-day Naples that blanketed the region in ash. Neanderthal populations, already thin and already isolated in scattered pockets, kept shrinking. Homo sapiens groups, more interconnected, appear to have absorbed the shocks better, and in some cases absorbed something else too. Because extinction, it turns out, may not be the whole story. When Paebo's team completed the Neanderthal genome in 2010, they found something almost nobody expected. Most people alive today, outside of sub-Saharan Africa, carry somewhere between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA, not as a curiosity, as a functioning part of your biology. Some of it shapes immune response. Some of it affects skin and hair. Some of it may influence how certain people respond to cold, to altitude, to specific illnesses. Which means Neanderthals did not simply lose. They dissolved, interbred, absorbed, folded into the expanding population of Homo sapiens until there were not enough of them left, genetically distinct, to call a separate species anymore. The last Neanderthals may not have died out so much as disappeared into you. The same appears true of the Denisovans. Populations in parts of Asia and Oceania today, particularly in Papua New Guinea, carry up to 5% Denisovan ancestry, including gene variants that help some Tibetan populations survive at extreme high altitude, a trait almost certainly inherited directly from interbreeding tens of thousands of years ago. So the story is not really extinction in the way you were taught it. It is closer to convergence. Different human lineages, walking parallel paths for hundreds of thousands of years, meeting again and again at the edges of shrinking territory, sometimes competing, sometimes merging, until only one lineage remained wide enough, connected enough, and numerous enough to keep going without interruption. Here is the part that should sit with you. You are not the product of a single triumphant species crushing its rivals. You are the product of absorption, of networks that reached farther than they needed to, of small kindnesses to strangers that turned out to be a survival strategy nobody planned. Somewhere in your genome, quite possibly, is a fragment of a species that no longer has a name of its own carried forward because your ancestors were willing to let a stranger in. That instinct did not disappear when the last Neanderthal breathed their last breath in a cave in Iberia 40,000 years ago. Look at how you live now. You add friends of friends. You trust a recommendation from someone 3 connections removed. You build networks that stretch across continents, most of which you will never meet in person, and you lean on them anyway when things get hard. It feels modern. It is not. It is the same strategy that made you the last human species standing, running on hardware that is tens of thousands of years old. You walk into a crowded room. Every face is different, but every single one of them is the same species as you, because somewhere back in the deep cold of an ice age, your ancestors chose to widen the circle instead of closing it. That is not a metaphor. That is the actual reason you are here to notice it at all.